Okay, so we're back looking at the basics of garden design. We've hit the client initial consultation, the brief. We're now onto the more practical side, which is the site survey and site analysis. So the first thing we've got to do is we've got to separate the two out. We've got the site survey. This is very much the measuring part of the job. So we're looking at the boundaries, we're looking at the footprint of the house, where the windows are, where the back door opens, leading onto the garden. We've got key features as well, such as trees, perhaps there's a stream, pond, something like that. Yeah, here we have to make sure that's all noted down so we can factor it in if we need to when we're designing the garden. Then we've got the site analysis. This is very much the hippie brother of the site survey. This is how the garden feels. This is the experience of the garden as the client or the individual going into the space. So we're thinking about the sound, the sights, the smells, which way the wind's blowing, etc. We're analysing the garden from the user's perspective.
So this is the garden that we're going to be using for today's example. A garden of this size and shape, to be honest, I would get a professional surveying company to do. However, a smaller garden, it's always good to do yourself because then you really get to know the space while you're working with it.
So whether or not I do the survey or if I get it done professionally, I still need to do the site analysis. This is where I'm going to get to know the garden, some of my initial design thoughts are going to start formulating, and I'm going to really get a feel for the space and how the client sees it. But let's start back with the survey.
Okay, measuring up. So first we need the house, and that's assuming the garden is attached to a house. If your space doesn't have a building attached, we'd need a baseline to work from. This could be a boundary or we could put one in temporarily. I'm going to start by drawing the footprint, so we have the shape of the house, its ins and outs. Next we need windows, doors, any access points. And then after that, as well as measurements, we're going to need to look at levels. So we're going to find a datum point. So this is the building line, and we're going to be putting in all the different measurements that we're going to need, such as door openings, if there's pillars or if there's bits that stick out, measurements to and from, and this is going to set like a line that we're going to measure the rest of the garden off a lot of the time, so we need to make sure that we get this right and include all features. Okay, so we've got the house. Next we need the shape or the footprint of the garden. This particular garden is almost triangular, but even if the garden's rectangular, it's sometimes quite hard to get a good perspective when you're in the garden, and it might not be quite as it looks. So we need to use something called triangulation to get the exact boundaries. I'm going to go into much more detail in an in-depth video on triangulation later on, but for now, this is how it works.
Now we've got the footprint to the house, there might be an element that we need to plot on the drawing, such as a gate post or a tree, and to get this accurately on the drawing, what we're going to do is on site we're going to measure from two particular points. On this case we're going from the corner of the building, so here we're looking at 5 metres from this corner, and then from this corner it just so happens that we're 5 metres again to the point there. We've done that on site, we note it on the site drawing. When we get back to the office, we're going to get a pair of compasses. We're going to measure out 5 metres on the compasses, make sure that's nice and accurate, and from that corner of the building we're then going to draw a curved line or just something big enough so that we can show 5 metres from this corner. Then we're going to double check the measurement again or change it, whatever's relevant to whatever it is you're trying to measure. So again, another 5 metres in this case. From the other corner of the building, we're going to draw the line again. Where these two lines cross, this is where that spot is exactly. And it's a really accurate way of measuring exactly where something is and plotting it correctly on the drawing.
Okay, so next we need to get some levels. Now I tend to work with a zip level, but if you can get help, or if you're used to using one and prefer it, you can also use a laser level. And one of the first things we need to do when taking level is to get a datum.
Okay, so as a datum point, we could either use perhaps the DPC, which is top of these blue bricks here, which we've already discovered, or potentially we could look at the inside of the floor, maybe here, just the internal floor. We have done it before where we use the door sill. The only thing you have to be a little bit careful with there is whether or not the sill is the same on both doors and whether or not it all ties in, as it were. But they're the two sort of most obvious points there. So this datum, we're going to give it a number. I tend to start with a high number like 10,000. The reason being is if we were to go for 0, and then we're going to be having to have our numbers as either a minus or a positive, which can get confusing. We might step down 1 or 2 steps, 200, 400 mil minus. But then we might start going back up steps again. And when we get into the positives, that can often cause confusion on site. Now, where you take these levels from can vary dramatically depending on the garden. I'd always suggest we need to start off with the hard landscaping surfaces. So maybe step down initially from the house, what the height of the patio is. It might be also some fixed points where the gate is, for instance, every 2 or 3 meters along the boundaries, so we know where we are there, a couple in the middle. Then we've got key features such as trees, if there's a stream or any water, if there's already a pagoda that they're probably not going to get rid of or something like this. We need to make sure we've got key levels there. The rest is going to come down to you and the site. If it's a relatively simple site, it might be fairly flat and therefore you don't need any more than that. But if the land moves around, goes up and down, obviously we've got the potential for water to gather in places and we need to know where they might be.
So here's a site survey that I drew up for a project we did a couple of years ago. You can take a look at some of the details here. First of all, as you can see, there's lots of measurements in and around the building. We've also triangulated where we used a pair of compasses and reached the boundary points, especially up near the garden room there. I don't know if you can see, the garden itself is not perfectly rectangular, so it's important that we triangulate each of the boundary corners so that we can make sure that we're accurate with our site. We don't want to find that it's slightly lozenged and we've drawn it as a perfect rectangle. There's various levels on there as well. As you can see, I've taken levels sort of every few meters on both sides of the garden, and I've also taken measurements of boundary wall that's already there as well. Other notes on there, you'll see I've combined this as a site survey and analysis. There's various notes talking about overlooking neighbours. You can see there that there's some good photographs that I can refer back to. Although you've done the site survey and this isn't necessarily a document that the client's going to see, I always find it's very useful to draw it up in neat as if you were going to present it, because this then is a great document to refer back to when you're designing the garden to make sure you've got all the points alongside the brief and that all bases are covered. Again, the more detail you can get in here, the better when you're doing the survey, and then you can summarise this on the actual drawing with real key points. Again, just cover a couple of other points to note. You'll see I've put a north arrow there, so I can, when it comes to planting and even hard landscaping as well, I can see where the sun's going to hit and where there's going to be lots of shade in the winter time. Various other bits and pieces there, but hopefully that's fairly clear.
So there we go, that is the site analysis and site survey wrapped up. A very whistle-stop tour there. Clearly there's an awful lot more that goes into this and there's a lot more detail, but I wanted to give you a really rough overview so we can see where we're going with this and give you a good start to it. All I would add is that the site survey is so important to get this right. If we get this right, then we've got a great base to build our design from. If we get it wrong, we may find that later on down the line the design starts to fail, things don't add up, or even worse, they might get to build the design and find there's a fundamental flaw, which then is going to fall on us. So a little bit of time, extra time spent here can save a lot of problems later on. I often find with the site survey as well, it's good to go back, once you've drawn up the site survey, it doesn't hurt just to nip back for an hour, check some of the measurements, look at what you've done, does everything look right, is there anything out of step, And if you forget to take a measurement, or if a measurement doesn't quite look right, you've then got that opportunity to double check it. Whatever you do not guess. You can't, just because one measurement is here and one measurement is there does not mean that the middle measurement will correlate. And if we get that one wrong, we've only got ourselves to blame. I often preempt my customers as well, when I'm going out to do a site survey and it's not an overly simple one. I sort of say, well, look, I'm gonna go out, do the site survey, take all the measurements. I'll probably want to come back and just double check some of these when I've finished as well. I hope that's okay. They're going to see that as an extra professional and belt and braces approach, which most clients are going to like. So I hope you found this helpful, useful. If you have, please remember to subscribe, and we'll see you again very soon.